Welcome, everybody, to this episode of the Ninth Grade Experience podcast. I'm your host, Chris Dutchko. The goal of the Ninth Grade Experience is to give you the story of the ninth grade students here at Emmaus High School and beyond through the people who live it daily, the students and the staff. We will attempt to touch on the real issues and stories that ninth grade students face in order to prepare them to know that ninth grade counts. So today is a special episode. There's no video for this episode. It's an audio-only episode. So hopefully you're out there listening to this today. But today we are coming to you from a recording on October 22nd at the Pennsylvania Council of Teachers of English and Language Arts from Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. I was applied and invited to a conference to talk about the ninth grade experience and to get perspective from English teachers around the state of Pennsylvania as to what are some important skills that ninth grade students can learn in their English class in order to prepare them for the future and beyond. So we had a chance to talk with four educators from across the state of Pennsylvania today to be able to get the perspective on what they're doing in their ninth grade classes, what their ninth grade experience was like, and to get a real sense of what is going on in classrooms around the state. So hopefully you enjoy hearing from John, Kristen, Kelly, and Sarah today on this episode. So as always, you can get all of our episodes at ninthgradeexperience.com. You can subscribe to all the audio podcasts by going to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere else where you get podcasts. We love to hear from everybody. So if you go to our website at ninthgradeexperience.com and click the microphone, you can leave us a voicemail that we can use on this show as well, or you can reach out and contact us on the contact form there too. And don't forget, all of our episodes, except for this one, are on YouTube as well. So if you just search Ninth Grade Experience Podcast, you'll be able to find us anywhere that you can either watch or listen to these shows. So thanks a lot for joining in, and we are going to now hear from John, Kristen, Kelly, and Sarah. Welcome, everybody, to this special episode of the Ninth Grade Experience Podcast. We are on a road trip today. We're in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. We are at the Pennsylvania Council of Teachers of English and Language Arts Conference for 2021. And we are here with several English teachers from around the state of Pennsylvania and many college students that are here watching as well, too. Hoping to learn a little bit about podcasting, ninth grade experiences, and how the English curriculum and things fit in with that. So we thank everybody that's sitting here at the table with us today that's willing to be a participant. So thank you very much, everybody. So we are here we have John, Kristen with an E, Kelly with a Y, and Sarah with an H, and I forgot John with no H. So everyone here has common names with unique spellings. So it's kind of interesting. So thank you, everybody, for joining us today. All right. So quiet bunch to start. Remember, we're audio, so you have to speak or else it's going to be really awkward for everybody. So we always ask our guests, the first question that we always ask them is, what was your ninth grade experience like? Because we found that no matter what age you are, or if you're a current ninth grader, usually students have a pretty good story about their ninth grade experience. So I always tell our adult guests, we have 4 adults here, they don't have to tell what year they were a ninth grader, and they don't have to necessarily say where they were a ninth grader, but if they can tell us a story, and today, since we're at an English conference, we're going to focus on their ninth grade English class experience. So does somebody have a memory of what their ninth grade English class was like, and what did they do? And make sure you introduce yourself when you kind of start talking.
So I'll go. My name's Kelly, and I had to go back a great many years to get to, I'm like, wait a second, 28 years since I've been in ninth grade. So I had to think about it, but it always comes up for me, even as an English teacher today, what my English teacher did in ninth grade. Mm-hmm. Like that, he kind of set a tone for me even before I knew I would be an English teacher. And I don't necessarily use these tactics anymore. I think they're a little bit outdated. But I remember a couple of things. He gave us lists of words not to use in our writing, like I, you know, but you get it now. Like what he was trying to do was get us to write through a different lens. Mm-hmm. instead of always thinking about it from our own perspective, he wanted us to think about it from an outside perspective. But as a ninth grader, I didn't understand that or know that.
Yeah,
or
you don't get context as a ninth grader.
Exactly. So I didn't understand the context, but I understand it now. And then I remember reading And Then There Were None by Agatha Christie in ninth grade too. And I remember really liking that book. I had no interest in teaching at that point, no interest in becoming an English teacher at that point, no idea that I would do any of those things. But for some reason, those are my two big memories. Even if I were to think of all of ninth grade, that's all I really could come up with. So,
How about other people on the panel here? What do you remember about your ninth grade education and especially your English class?
I'll go. I'm Kristen, and I probably relate my ninth grade year. I probably relate really closely with the students who have just spent some time at home, because I was actually homeschooled during my ninth grade year. We were made homeless at the end of my eighth grade year, and so all of the things that I was looking forward to in ninth grade, like finally being on the high school marching band and participating in drama and being on the newspaper, all of that stuff was kind of gone out the window 2 weeks before the start of my freshman year. So we had to actually homeschool, and we were actually the first homeschool family in the district too. So we were kind of groundbreakers, my parents and I. But we had to create a curriculum from scratch. The district didn't actually have one, since we were the only ones to do it in high school. So my mom and I had to sit down and write out the whole curriculum. And at the time, I really wanted to be a rock music journalist. I wanted to work for Rolling Stone. So I decided that my English year was going to be reading things like musician and bass player and Rolling Stone. And I was just going to copy the journalistic stylings of, say, David Wenner and all of the other journalists at the time. And actually, I spent more time doing that than reading the required books on the list for ninth graders. My writing got pretty good, though, I have to say.
So was your dream to be like an Almost Famous? Like that would have been your life?
Oh my gosh, would it ever? That would have been awesome.
So how about John or Sarah? What do you remember from your ninth grade English experience?
All right, I guess I can jump in. So I can't say that I was homeschooled, but I came from very kind of disoriented kind of family background. Of a few years prior, my parents had gotten divorced, which was like earth-shattering for young kid for me. And so eighth grade was really the first time that a teacher had reached out to me, specifically an English teacher, to say, try this poetry thing. It's all focused on emotion. Just try that out. And so then from eighth grade, I found this niche. And then going into ninth and then 10th grade, I was the first time that I was a separate school from my younger sister, who's 13 months younger than me. So it was always, oh, you're her sister, or, oh, is she related to you? And so it was finally the first experience, not only where I found my own place, but I think found a way from like my family to form my own identity and to say I could make myself who I wanted to be. And that really, for me, delves deep into English specifically as a way to express myself as an individual instead of allowing those things around me to define me, which is a big, deep thing, I'm sure, but at the time was more just an emotional teenage angst.
And John, how about you?
Yeah, I went to a public school, and I was more part of the crowd that would play sports. So I was playing football, and I had some of my football buddies in my English class. And I feel like for me, my 9th and 10th grade year, they kind of blended together. Like it's hard for me to think of, oh, this is what we did in my 9th grade English class. This is what we did in my 10th grade English class. But for me, what really stood out were the books that we read. So we read like Animal Farm. We read Fahrenheit 451 one year. We read The Epic of Gilgamesh, just things like that. And in the moment, the cool thing to do, was like to brush it off and to not really like be into the story, because that's what my buddies were doing. But I think as I've gotten older, I'm impressed with how much I remember of the stories. And so I would say the stories were really what captured my attention, and it's more of what I'm into now.
It's interesting when you listen to the four perspectives here, everyone kind of offers a very unique perspective to their ninth grade year. And, as we kind of work with our students in our individual classrooms, we always kind of have that and, trying to accommodate all the students, kind of reaching out, trying to find all those things of interest. And, just right here on a panel of four teachers of English, the four totally different perspectives. So to kind of follow that, is there something that you took from that experience that maybe if you teach ninth grade now or teach high school or wherever you're teaching, do you take that experience from ninth grade and try to work it into your instruction in the classroom now?
Oh yeah, for sure. I was a ninth grade advisor last year, and obviously now I teach them as 10th graders, which is kind of cool because I got to know them before I was actually their teacher. Some of them are reluctant writers. They don't want to write, and a lot of them say, I used to like writing. I don't like writing now because I have to write it. And what I always think about is, that experience of reading, about a bass player that I really admired and then trying to copy that about another bass player, trying to write a story. And I said, look, why don't you practice writing by writing something you actually like? If you don't want to write something for me, but I want you to demonstrate a certain skill, like, comma usage or modifying adjectives or whatnot, making adverbs, do that with something you actually enjoy, as opposed to writing about, Great Gatsby or whatever.
I can kind of go off of that then, because with both my curriculum that I teach 9th and 10th grade English at a virtual cyber school. And so I kind of bounce off of that, where I start with going from the 7th and 8th grade curriculum where it's based on creative writing, where it's based on make up a fantasy, make up something that's like The Great Gatsby or that story you really liked and copy that kind of mechanism or copy the characters. Even if, you brush it off and they're like, no, I'll find something of, okay, write it like it's a video game or write it like it's a football game, something you're interested in. And then from there, the curriculum goes to writing a speech or writing an argument. So for me, I base it from my own 9th grade experience and even high school to college of saying, okay, you like this. Now, how would you say it? Make it your own voice. And so we talk a lot about kind of context, but also what's specific about them. And a lot of them find, I like a goofy, kind of nonchalant, I don't care kind of attitude of kind of like Catcher in the Rye style narration. And I'm like, that works for you? Run with it. But be aware, kind of back to what we were saying earlier, of realize that there is a context for that and kind of connecting when you should be writing like that and kind of making them think about how to use your voice, when to use it. So I find it interesting that you mention of kind of connecting that as well.
And to piggyback off that, when it comes to context, so for whatever reason, that's always stood out to me, that teacher had that list of words not to use. And once I figured out why it was, I wanted to do it with my students. And then I tried it for a few years, and I decided, you know what, let's throw it out and see what happens. And I've found that it flows much smoother if I just let them go. So I've kind of let go of the reins a little bit more, but I still need to practice the context thing as well.
I will say, if it helps, the way I do it as an opener for class, and I say, what is something that you would say to your friends that you would never say to your parents, because they either wouldn't get it or they think you're cursing at them, and they come up with the most craziest things, and then I go from there and go informal tone versus formal tone, and how you talk to different people, and then say that's the same thing with your writing. Which helps.
It's authenticity.
Right.
Because you're giving them back their real voice, their legitimate voice, which is something that we English teachers, unfortunately, rob from them when we have them write the 5-paragraph essay or write in third-person objective voice. You take that list of things you can't say because it's not academic writing. The minute that we do that, they lose the ability to speak for themselves because that's abnormal. We don't walk up to somebody and speak in third person objective.
Right.
We just don't do that.
We don't sit there either and say, I'm going to speak in this way and think through the whole process. We just go, this is what my thought is.
Right.
It's going to sound funky. I'm going to get it out, and you can tell me if that's not the word I should use.
Yeah, contractions happen.
And the other, like what you were saying, I do that with audience. When we're thinking about a different audience, okay, if you were saying this to your mother, but I'll have to think about that in the context of writing as well. That's a good idea.
I don't know, John, do you have any thoughts?
You guys are doing great. The only thing I was thinking of, but I really like the reading. Like I think if you guys are talking about the writing portion of like how can students make it applicable? Why does this matter for our lives? And in my mind, the things that really impacted me were, I don't necessarily think of, like when I was a 9th grader or 10th grader, I wasn't writing, or I think the stories I read at that age impacted me later on. I didn't know how it was impacting me in the moment.
Right.
So I don't know. I think I see a lot of power in the reading of just the text itself.
Oh yeah, I like you bringing up that point because I think that's important too. We've been talking about like mimicking other writers and looking at how other people's stories, and I think that's important too to say, read something and then think of it in comparison to yourself, but almost like you don't do the process as a 9th grader. It's like we're giving them all of these knowledge with the hope that sometime in the future they'll unpack it. So I have a question for you. And I don't mean to like take over podcast.
This is the beauty of doing this. Sometimes, as I tell people all the time, they're like, what's a good podcaster do? Sometimes you just get out of the way and let people do their thing here. So I'm going to go ahead.
All right. So can you give an example of I'm just curious of a book that you read that kind of how would it impact you later on? Because I'm kind of curious.
Oh, this is a question for me.
Yes, just for you. I mean, we can answer it. I'm pulling you in.
John has become our
on the spot.
John's our reading expert. We were talking a lot about writing from the one end of the table. So John, go ahead, pick a book and tell us. Give us your book report. Go ahead.
I'm just curious because I agree with you, but I'm wondering if it's from the same kind of standpoint of I've read books or I've then had to teach the books in a class and seeing it from a whole different perspective, or seeing it of, oh, this is why it's on a book list for 9th graders, and kind of being able to have that hindsight. So I'm curious of
what do you mean by that?
Catcher in the Rye.
Yeah, maybe you can start.
Yeah, okay, I'll answer my own question.
You sound like you have more to say about it.
Oh, fair enough. So Catcher in the Rye, where I think when I was a kid, I found him the narrator, a little obnoxious and kind of like a kid I wouldn't want to hang out with because I was very academic focused. And I was told off as a teen of, don't curse, don't act like that. But now I see as an adult and as a teacher that's a really important book to get the theme of not wanting to grow up and struggling with becoming an adult, and kind of some of those themes that a lot of our students are struggling with. And I can see that now as an adult, but when I was a kid, I was just kind of like, he whines so much. Why is he so whiny? I don't want to be like that. I don't want to hear him. I don't want to listen to him.
So are you asking what's the role of a teacher, I guess?
Kind of, yeah. Do you find, I guess, because you're an educator that you do more insightful thought about books, or is it you as a person 9th grade to now, if that makes sense?
A little bit more clarity.
Okay, so
that.
So here, let me actually. So we have our next question that we kind of, and maybe this will kind of help us.
I feel like it's the second question.
So here's our next question. So this is where I get to jump in and be the host. So our next question is: how can we encourage students during their 9th grade year to embrace the content, curriculum, and skills taught in their English class? So it seems like right now we are on a book chat. So maybe that will frame the question a little bit, is how can we as English teachers kind of encourage students that maybe, the payoff isn't necessarily there. So I read this book in 9th grade and it won't hit me till I'm 25. And as a freshman in high school, that's not the answer that they want to hear. So maybe the question that we're thinking about is so we know as adults that this is going to impact you maybe down the road, but how do we encourage our students while they're doing it, and they're, hopefully not reading the Spark Notes or the Cliff Notes or whatever, all the other things, or watching the videos online or whatever they're doing, to embrace the actual learning and the process with all that?
I have a couple of thoughts about this, and I have strong opinions here. So I teach English 11 American literature. Obviously, one half of my curriculum is about as dry as you can get. We start in the 1600s with The Captivity of Mary Rowlandson.
Ooh, Anne Bradstreet.
Yeah, Anne Bradstreet.
John
yeah,
Winthrop.
They're all like, yes, let's talk about Puritans for the next 3 months.
Yeah.
But then I start saying, but what if you were Anne Bradstreet and you lost your everything in your room? How would you feel?
Yeah.
And that is how I grab my students. I've had students say to me, Mrs. Jones, I hate reading, but I love your class. And that is the highest compliment I've ever been given, because the student blatantly hates reading, but he loves coming to my class because he knows that every character that I give to him, he's going to be able to connect to. So I feel like it connects back to what you're trying to say and what he's trying to say too. Like, for whatever reason, when you were in ninth grade, you connected to those characters, whether it was from your teacher or from what you read. For whatever reason, that changed you in that moment. But then as an English teacher, we look at it differently too. Like, when I read Mary Rowlandson, I'm looking, okay, she uses all these allusions to pull in the Puritans, and I tell my students that too. She's very biblical, and Job and all of these biblical things. But then at the same time, I say to the students, well, what if you were kidnapped by whoever in 2021? What would you hold on to? And how would you deal with that moment? And maybe your captors are nice and kind, and you have to get to know them. So that's how I reel my students in. I make it very real to their lives, and I spend a lot of time doing it that way. So that's just...
I was going to say right at the start of that, before you started speaking, Kelly, I stole the microphone from John, because the first thing that came to mind was last year as a ninth grade advisor, like trying to get them to understand that there is a connection between what you learn and what you're going to do later on. And when we sat down to write the curriculum for ninth grade advisory, I actually wrote the upper school curriculum for it. The first thing is just letting them know that you've got to read and you've got to write in every single class. So you may as well pay attention in English, so that down the road, at the point in time when you're taking physics or organic chem or whatever, insert class here, you can actually understand what it is you're doing. And when we would get together, with the ninth grade students at the time in the ninth grade advisory classes, it was really just reinforcing this idea that these skills are long-term skills. Like at our school, for example, English is the only class that is required all 4 years for graduation. So they're stuck with me pretty much the entire time. And they have to understand that those skills, you may never use calculus again, but by golly, you're going to speak and read and write every day.
In a quick interjection, my husband's a chemical engineer, right? He went to school for chemical engineering. What was the one quality they were worried about him having when they hired him? One. It was writing. And it was the reason he didn't get his first job, and the reason he got his second job, because he had submitted a writing example, and they hired him not based on the like nearly 4.0 he had in chemical engineering. No. It was his ability to write and assess writing.
So he needs to come talk to my seniors, because they all think that they don't need to pay attention now.
I tell my students all the time, I'm like, listen, you love math, but you're still going to have to write. I'm sorry.
And it is interesting, like when we hear, like our podcast is usually focused on our school or like the area surrounding it, but we have people from all over the state of Pennsylvania. And I would imagine if we had English teachers from anywhere else around the country, you would be hearing kind of the same thought process of like the basics of English. You're always going to have to write. You're always going to have to read, whether it's, putting together furniture from IKEA,
Yes.
which if that was a high school class, then that should be like you only get a diploma if you can put together one of the futons from IKEA. But something like that, or being able to write an email. I think I was actually talking to Kristen earlier in the day, and we were joking around about how during the pandemic here, we've gotten so many emails from kids where the entire email is in the subject line and the body is blank.
Or they have no name, and it's just like, who are you?
So yeah, so
I
like
literally say that to them.
all of these.
Oh, that's painful.
All of these things that we as adults kind of take for granted, that at some point, and we see it a lot in ninth grade. That's kind of like the transition year of like, oh, you don't know how to do X, like. How did you not learn it in middle school? Like, we assume that they come in with all these different skills and abilities, and then we get them, and it's like, well, you can't write an email. Like, you don't know how to like put your thoughts down and like express them to people without it being like reading like a emoji like emoticon. I don't even think people use emoticons anymore. I don't. The kids in the room, the students in the room are looking at me like, "What's an emoticon?"
Nope.
That's before you could actually have pictures on the text. You had to make them with the little characters. But yeah, it's like, just really thinking about those kinds of things. So does anybody else want to get back to that question? I know we stole it away from John here. I think he's had a lot of time to think about those books at this point. So I don't know if he's got the book answer yet, but if you're ready for it, we got it.
Maybe we want to move on to the next question.
Poor John down here. He's really struggling for that book. He'll get there though.
They impacted me though, even though they're not.
We are not going to do the thing where we skip around. We can skip you for now, but as a good teacher would, we're going to come back to you at the end, and you are going to give us.
Can I
and
give
you are going
John
to give
a
us
good
one of those
example?
books.
Would you like
Go
an
for it.
example?
Yeah, that'd be great.
So I always think that it's good to have like solid examples, and I think about books, like a book that you read when you were young, and then you read it maybe later when you're an adult, and it all changes. Like your perspective of what just took place in that book, you're like, I didn't see that before. That's crazy. I keep in my mind, I keep coming back to The Giver, and I don't know why.
We just read that.
So
reread that. Yeah.
So the first time you read it, do you see it differently now than you did then?
I remember the first time I read The Giver, it was the euthanasia really stuck out to me, like the killing of. Well, I shouldn't spoil this book, but sorry, spoilers. But
it's been out there. I don't even know when was The Giver written.
I feel like if you haven't read it, it's
okay.
too late.
Yes. Well,
the boat sinks in Titanic too.
Whoa.
Go ahead.
Yeah, but I remember that part stuck out to me when I was younger, and then as I've gotten older, I think more of the like the role. What's the role of the individual in a society? That's more of what stood out to me. Like the themes of.
Oh yeah.
Just like, yeah, what's the role of a family? And I'm blanking. And yeah, if anyone else.
Yeah, I was gonna say I can jump in of kind of similarly. To answer that for The Giver, I actually read the entire Giver series, and then when the author came out with a second, or I guess you would call it a fourth book. Yeah, the fourth book, where it's supposed to be the mother of the original character from The Giver, which, for anyone out there listening or anyone in here, if you haven't read that whole series, please do. It will change you emotionally. But I think for me, when I was reading it, I focused a lot on, like you're saying, the following that first person narration of the character and being like, what is going on in society? How could they do something so harsh? And I think now as an adult, I feel more connected with the giver, the character, where I'm like, I need to give back to society. I need to kind of share that, and kind of like you're saying, of that connection of role in a community, of what do I feel, how will I be remembered? I feel like, and
well, even like the reverberations. You can talk about memories in the story. Like, what's the role of memories? Like how like you have the one role of the giver and the receiver, and what's the purpose of memories in society? Like, are we supposed to remember the hard times? Are we supposed to only be thinking of the good times? And so it's like, how are we viewing the past? Like, do we even know the past? Right.
And I think that too, then coming back to kind of working with students, I think it's important then to realize that, like you're saying, of we have more experiences, we have more memories. So it's the question of being able to almost look at it in like a historical context, where instead of reading the book how we see it and the symbols and the allusions, going in almost, because we talked about earlier, where asking the students and saying, what is it you're focusing on this and why? And I think then questioning that and building it off of the connection with the students and what they're focusing on is, I think, what we're kind of hitting here, especially with books, is meeting them where they're at instead of saying, I as the teacher have the one and only way of seeing this novel.
Sarah, you said that, and what you and John are talking about makes me think about watching Disney movies.
Yes.
Because when you're little, Disney movies are princesses, right? And princes and characters that are just kind of one-dimensional. And then when you're older, obviously, there's a beautiful Snow White mask, right next to me that Kelly is wearing. And you know, when you're small and you're watching those movies, it's just one thing. But when you're an adult, you go, oh my gosh, did they really mean this for kids? You know, we talk about this in my class a lot with the movie Up, because in my opinion, Up was made for adults, not for kids. Because it's so much richer to watch Up as an adult than it is as a younger person, I think.
Oh yeah, we could have a whole chat about Disney Pixar
Right?
and its meaning for
my
parents.
gosh.
I need to insert something here. Frozen is my all-time favorite movie, and everyone's like, "That's so cliche. Let it go. That's so stupid." But I identify with Elsa because she is trying to change who she is. She's trying to let go of the past, move on to the future. I will start crying because it affects me that deeply.
Right.
But a young girl's like, "Oh, princess," and I'm like, a woman trying to become herself. Oh, that's a tough spot to be in, Elsa. Anyway, I had to
No,
insert
it's kind of ironic though, because that's kind of what we were all saying about our 9th grade year, and what kind of I think this podcast is about is like that's a pivotal time where you're forming your identity and you're making your place. So it's kind of ironic that you see that in Elsa, and it's promoted for kind of younger children. We'll say like 8th, 9th graders or younger, but almost like we see that same model that we see as adults of, oh, in 9th grade we were finding ourselves and we were figuring out who we were, to then see that reflected in kind of stories that we write about for that audience.
Right.
So to make sure we get to our final question here as we kind of move, it seems like we could go for a long time here, but our session ends in a little bit, but I don't think we have something that people have to run to. So if you want to stay, we can keep chatting. But our last question, so we've talked about like what that transition looks like and kind of the growth and you know, for the 9th grade year. So our final question is, at the end of a student's 9th grade year, what should students have learned that will help them prepare for success in high school and beyond? And then a couple things that we can throw in with this question is, do all students need the same skills as they move forward? And this is kind of near and dear for me, is if students were not successful during their 9th grade year, how can we rebuild their confidence in reading and writing to continue to work on improving those skills? Because so many times we see that students are defeated in that 9th grade year, and hopefully it doesn't set them up for a 4-year struggle in English language arts, but it kind of seems that way. So there's lots of questions on the board here for our final discussion point, and we probably will address none of them, but talk for 10 minutes. So if anyone wants to answer our final question here, or start the conversation with, you know, now that we've gotten them in theory through the 9th grade year, what should they know and how will it help them in the future?
Failure is an option.
Yes.
Our seniors at my school have to give senior speeches at the end, and the most popular choice for the seniors is how I failed and how I picked myself back up. And even though the seniors kind of go, oh, I hate that we're saying this again, I tell them it's so imperative for the 9th graders to hear this, because they think I failed and I will never do X. I failed, I will never do Y. I didn't get picked for the starting team. So what? You keep going. You just keep working on those skills again and again and again. Nobody is perfect the first time, not even Einstein.
Yeah, I love that, because there is such a perfectionism trope in, I feel like, society, where with cancel culture and saying if you say one thing wrong, you need to be fired from your job, you need to be removed, you need to no longer be a YouTuber or an influencer or any of your jobs. And I think telling them of like, it's okay to fail, it's okay to even fail on a big public platform like that, and you can pick yourself up, is something important.
I told my students just last week, I said, the things that I failed at were followed by my biggest successes. And it's true. The things that I really didn't do well in were followed up by the things that I did my best in. And I also wanted to address the skills. And it goes back to what both of you were saying, because the other day I was talking to a bunch of 5th grade parents, and they were like, oh, my kids, they usually have straight A's and they don't right now. And I was thinking the whole time, does it matter? Like if they have straight A's or not, is that going to make them the people that you want them to be? My kids, I want both of and I have a 9th grader right now. This conversation is really weird for me. But he's in 9th grade. He's doing very well academically, but I concentrate on his skills with him. Is he able to talk to people? Is he polite? You know, does he have skills that are going to work into the beyond and that sort of thing? But yeah, certainly not all students are going to have the same skill set, and we shouldn't force them to have the same skill set. Some people are going to be better readers. Some people are going to be better public speakers. I know my son is an awesome public speaker, but maybe not so much of a writer. And then some are going to be, like, both of my kids are super artistic. Some are going to be, and I always hear about, oh, my child's in AP all of the classes. And I'm like, I hate everything, you know, because my kids are not in AP anything, and nor will they be. But they are brilliant human beings on their own, and they need to be acknowledged for that. So that's...
I think my 2 cents to kind of with that, to wrap it back to identity, is I always tell my students, I want to teach them to be advocates for themselves.
Right.
So that idea of, one, realizing perfection is not reachable and you don't have to be. But then secondly, of kind of going to like emails and learning skills to say, I want to be good at this so I can communicate. Or I'm going to miss a class. I need to reach out and talk about this. Or I don't understand something. I need to ask for help. And so helping them with that of, I think, 9th grade, because of the assumptions we make of, you should know these skills already, and kind of meeting them where they're at and saying, okay, if this is our bar or our line of where we assume you should be on XYZ, and saying, it's okay if you're not there, but you need to know how to ask for help if you're not sure how to move forward. And so for me, that's a big thing, even just in pacing for the week or emails and reaching out to me is something I try to kind of push on my students to say, you don't have to be perfect, you don't have to get an A in my class, but I want you to learn that this is your first step to being that kind of quote unquote adult form where you have to speak for yourself.
John, you're up. Okay. We made it back to John. Here we are.
Full circle. Here we are. I think, yeah, it just comes down to like what you define success as, because, you know, yeah, like what Sarah was saying, you know, is success going to be based off of how you're doing academically, or, you know, and we're talking about schools and English language arts. So yeah, that it does matter. And you know, for, yeah, what Kelly mentioned earlier about her husband and the job that he got, you know, there were some academic skills involved in that. But I think just giving students a holistic picture of what it means to be successful. Because I think, and we have to also realize that, you know, our students are coming from different backgrounds, and, you know, I grew up in a different country for half of my life. And so, you know, there might be some of those where and especially like nowadays, you know, there's a lot of immigrants coming to America. So, I mean, thinking about,
and an online world where you can connect with people from all different countries, time zones, cultures.
So, yeah, go for it.
I will say this, having a 9th grader myself, he has friends in many different countries. He has had videos that he's made that have already been watched by many people in different countries. And we have to make sure our students are prepared for that global communication situation. And podcasting is a big thing, this happening here. A lot of times I feel like it's my mentality from Gen X, but my mentality is we have to set them up to be like a teacher or an engineer or a nurse. But the jobs that they're gonna have don't exist yet. And we have to have it set up for success by teaching them skills like emailing and communicating, because we don't really know what they're going to do with their lives.
And I think I like that, of almost the idea of like, don't let the system define you, because the system is ever changing.
The system hasn't been created. Right. They have to create it on their own.
Yeah.
And we have to set them up for that.
I think another thing too is just like character formation. You know, like who do we want our students to be? And you gotta, you know,
You're exactly right.
There's also, you know, there's the roles of the parent, there's the roles of like the teacher, but so yeah, just what are the qualities or characteristics that we want to encourage in our students? Like, do we want them to think about like what it means to be brave, or just like,
right, or even what success means. And success shouldn't be a number or a letter on a paper.
Right.
Which I think raises a lot of other questions for another podcast and another thought about the education system in America. But
it sounds like hopefully I'll have to get re-invited back for 2022 here. I just want to close out real fast by reading a quote from Ryan Holiday, who's a pretty prolific author. He writes about stoicism a lot, and the quote is, "When intelligent people read, they ask themselves a simple question: what do I plan to do with this information? And I think that's a great way to end our podcast here. A lot of great thoughts from 4 different, very divergent backgrounds. And I think it's really interesting to have this chance to have a conversation with educators across the state of Pennsylvania. And I think it's interesting that it comes back to a lot of the same things that we talk about, whether it's an English class, a science class, a social studies class, about preparing kids with skills that they can use across the board. So I want to thank John, thank Kristen, thank Kelly, and thank Sarah for coming up and being brave and coming up and joining our podcast for the day. And I guess you'll just have to find out where John is online, and then he'll finally be able to tell you about all the books that he's read, and maybe he'll fill us in then. So thanks a lot for joining us on this episode of the podcast, everybody.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.